In this video, we are going to explore scenarios of what causes an ATV to overheat, and I'm going to use this Arctic Cat as my example. In the first scenario, we are going to check the fins of the radiator to see if they are plugged with mud. As you can see in the upper right hand corner of this radiator, I do have some mud plugged in the fins. But to check the entire radiator, I'm going to go ahead and take this light, turn it on, and then I'm going to drop it down behind the fan, and I will go ahead and shut the lights off in the garage and reposition the camera, and then we can look through the front of the radiator to see if we can see the light behind it. As you can see, with the lights off in the garage and the camera repositioned, looking through the fins of the radiator, you can see the fan and the light. So that tells me this radiator is fairly clean. But I always take the front fender off when I change the oil and filter. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and clean the fins of the radiator now, because it's easier when I have the front fender off. Okay, now in scenario number 2, we want to check the fan to make sure it's working properly. But the first thing we're going to do is go to the fuse box, which is right here, and I see I have a fuse that says fan, and I'm going to check the fuse and make sure that it's not blown, which this one isn't. So that eliminates the fuse. So now we can go ahead and work on the fan. Make sure the fan is working properly. But in order to do that, we have to bypass the temperature sensor control, which is located in the bottom of the radiator here. So if we find the plug at the back of the fan, which is right here, we can go ahead and unplug that, and that, now we can find the plug that feeds that temperature sensor control and plug that in. Okay, the feed for that temperature sensor control is right here. So if I unplug that plug right there, and I take my plug from my fan and plug it in there to the feed, then I bypass that control, and I can go ahead and turn my ignition on and see if the fan works. And there it does. You can hear it working. So now I know the fan is good. So the next thing to check is the sensor temperature control. Okay, once we determine the fan is working properly, the next step is to check the sensor. Now the sensor on this machine is down in the lower corner of the radiator. And what the sensor does is it senses the temperature of the coolant. As the temperature of the coolant gets hot, it sends power to the fan to kick on. So if the coolant is cold, the fan won't come on. Now the way to check the sensor is we're going to have to drain the radiator of the coolant, take the sensor out, leave it hooked up, leave the ignition on, and then we're going to have to heat a pan of water up to the temperature that the sensor is supposed to kick the fan on, and then set the sensor by holding the wires coming out of the back of the sensor into the pan of water just far enough to get it a reading, and see if it kicks the fan on. If it does kick the fan on, then you know the sensor is working properly. Okay, in scenario number 3, you want to check to see if your machine has a thermostat. If it does have a thermostat like this one does, which is located right here under this cover, you need to check to make sure that it's opening and closing. And you would do that the same way as the coolant sensor, where you would suspend it in water when you got it up to the temperature that it's supposed to open, and see if it does open. I did have to replace the thermostat on this one because I was having an overheating problem. Took the bolts out right here, took the cap off, and went ahead and replaced the thermostat. Here's the old thermostat right here. So you can see that it's not a big job, but that sometimes they do fail. So this thermostat was $30, so I went ahead and replaced it, and the machine has been working fine ever since. So that's, not all machines have thermostats, but if yours does, then that's a place that you need to check to make sure that your thermostat is working properly. Okay, in scenario number 4, you want to check all your hoses and clamps to make sure the clamps are on properly and the hoses are in good condition. Especially where this hose, like this hose that goes in front of the engine that goes over the frame, over time could rub a hole in it from rubbing on the frame. So those are the areas you want to look at where it's rubbing next to the metal frame or on top of the metal frame. I saw an older machine that had a hole in it, and it didn't leak coolant until you ran it with the water pump on. So that's how small the hole was, but it was enough that when the water pump came on and pushed coolant through it, it started to leak. Very little, but it leaked. And so over time, you could lose enough coolant for the machine to start overheating. So, but never open a radiator cap when the machine is hot, because that radiator is under pressure, and that coolant, if you open a cap, is going to spray out and burn you. So make sure you never open a radiator cap when the engine is hot. Okay. But those are some of the areas you want to check, and it's a good idea to check your coolant hoses periodically, because they do take on a lot of heat, and they can break down over time, and especially on older machines. All right. So if your coolant hoses are good and your clamps are all good, then you can eliminate that as the problem for your overheating. Okay, the last scenario to look at on this machine would be the water pump. And the water pump is located behind this cover right here. And so we'd have to drain the coolant out of the machine and take that cover off and check the water pump, which is a plastic propeller that's on a shaft, and it pulls the fins on it as they turn when the engine's running, pulls the water through from the bottom of the radiator and up through the top and pushes it back to the radiator. So that could be a more complicated job if that's what but it could be done. So you'd have to decide whether you want to do it or not. But that's basically most water pumps are located in this area, and you would want a repair manual to refer to your machine and where the water pump was, and those are the areas you want to look at if you've got a problem with your machine overheating. If you have any questions, you can go to myquadrepair.com, and we have a forum there, and you could ask any question you want about what you saw in this video. So I hope this video has helped you, and good luck.